far as the region is concerned, there has not been the advance that should have been there. We have an institution called SAARC. The idea of SAARC was that it will develop a regional identity. And we will see ourselves as a region trying to do the same things, which is to lift our societies from the bootstraps, give them the minimum dignities, make opportunities available for the youth. The youth in our country, as in the rest of the world, is going to pose the biggest challenge before our societies. Youth, by definition, is momentum. A person like me loses a job, we can sulk and read a book. Not for youth. Their energies have to be channelized. It is either in a positive direction or it is in a direction which is not very positive. But the youth have to be catered to. In our societies, 70 to 75% of the youth is below the age of 24, 25, 26. And this bulge is going to increase. This is a common problem which all of us have. Problems of nutrition, problems of literacy, basic health, gender discrimination, infrastructure, drinking water, the very basic issues are by and large shared in this region. Some have done better than the others. Sri Lanka has done, for instance, extremely well. And there was this hope that this region would be able to advance in a way we've seen some other regions do. ASEAN, for instance, in the age of the Konfrontasi, we thought only of problems in their region. But they took a regional decision of a political nature, saying that we are not going to let the positive agenda which we have to pursue be defeated by bilateral negative issues which we may have between us. That is a track we're going to follow independently of the larger challenge which is before our societies. And in fact, the fact that you are making advance on the larger agenda will make the prominence of these bilateral differences less and less. We have a long way to go on this, but I hope that this is the way in which the region would be able to make progress. Dramatic progress has not been made in SAARC, but in many areas, and I dealt with the subject before coming here, progress has been made in exchange of experts, exchange of lessons learned, contact of people, familiarity with each other's work. All this is going on. But in the major area of, let's say, having a trading area, in the way in which Mercosur has managed to do, taking into account the vulnerabilities of each individual economy, this is a challenge still before us. In Mercosur also, the component countries had a history of friction, but they also managed to overcome it in Latin America. This is the way to go regionally. As far as the India's place in the world is concerned, there's an interesting lesson in what our Prime Minister said when he addressed the nation on midnight, when we became independent, on the midnight of 14th August 1947. And it has not been remarked upon, but I find it extremely remarkable. There's one sentence when he says it's a very eloquent man who could put his thoughts in an extremely inspiring and catching way. And he says, when India awakes into life and freedom, basically he said that there is the task, responsibility which we have before us to the nation, responsibility to the nation, and then we have a larger responsibility to the world beyond. At that moment, when he's talking about emerging from decades of half a century of political struggle for Indian independence, for a Prime Minister to say that your responsibility extends to the whole world expresses a kind of a worldview which says that you cannot separate yourself from the problems of the world. In fact, in the Congress Party, when they used to pass resolutions in the 20s and the 30s and the 40s, very interesting. They would have resolutions on the internal situation, what needs to be done, moves made by the colonial power and what the reaction should be. And a heavy chunk, sometimes as good as 1/3 or the half, would be on what's happening in South Africa, what's happening in the colonies of Portugal, what's happening in Palestine, what one needs to do with apartheid and all these issues, global issues. Even in that national struggle, they had time for this because of this awareness that that India or any other country cannot separate themselves from the larger world which surrounds them and have to engage themselves in that value. Here, we are at a crossroads where this challenge is once again posed before us in a very heavy way. And this morning, I spoke at considerable length on this in Stony Brook University. The subject there was the global agenda and issues of multilateralism. And there I said that, and I'll just summarize this because I'm sure people would like to ask some questions. Basically, I said that you have to come to an understanding of what constitutes globalization. Globalization has become a buzzword. It's being used loosely. You ask anyone a definition of the word, they'll come up with their own. Globalization to the South very largely today means an attempted globalization of markets, the movement of capital, and a sweetening of the pill whereby those that are already advantaged in the North are seeking to enlarge their advantage. The talk was of a common tide, a tide which is going to lift all boats. But people don't see that happening. They see greater divisions posed before you as a result of this movement of compression. Compression itself doesn't bring coherence or harmony or equity. What we want is a globalization of opportunity and a globalization of equity. We have to understand that there is also a globalization of consequences and a globalization of positive results, globalization of negative results, and they cannot be limited to economic instruments. On the point of compression, Jonah recently made a very interesting point. He said, look, it took smallpox 3,000 years to be globalized. The first reported case of smallpox is in Egyptian records of about 1200 BC, 1300 BC. First recorded case, he says, of smallpox in Australia is about 1850 AD. It took 3,000 years for smallpox to be globalized. It took AIDS 30 years to be fully globalized. We have now a polarity in globalization. This polarity can be negative or it can be positive. What are the negative prospects of globalization? Globalization of disease, globalization of drugs, globalization of terrorism, globalization of enforced migration. We see boats lying around in affluent countries of people. Is there any desperation which is greater than the desperation of people who say, we do not want to live anymore where our forefathers have lived. We just want to move away. People in romantic literature want to move back from where they started. They want to go back if they are in exile. Here are people who voluntarily want to go into exile. Can you imagine the limit of desperation that is required to do that? In the 1970, we had the first global conference on environment, and which said globalization of environmental disaster. You cannot take a deep breath in the north, in the clean air of the north, anywhere in the world, and go somewhere else and not breathe anymore. It's not possible. These have all now going to require to be converted into global public goods, the positive side, and we need a global plan of governance in which the entire human society is mainstreamed in the formation of this scheme of governance. So what is the positive pole? The positive pole is in fact the entire gamut of the agenda before the global society. Whether it is economic, whether it is development, health, technology, or social aspects, or whatever, peace and security, development of norms, urbanization issues, youth issues, which I mentioned. This constitutes in its totality an agenda for the world, and you cannot pick and choose anymore. Globalization cannot mean globalization of capital, markets, and penetration of technology. The biggest global good, in my view, as an institution in the world today is the United Nations. And the biggest principle by which we should conduct ourselves is multilateralism, Because multilateralism ensures universal participativeness